Welcome to Back at the Movies, the podcast where we revisit our favorite Siskel and Ebert episodes.
Almost 50 years ago, two Chicago film critics, Gene Siskel.
I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And Roger Ebert.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Were hired to discuss movies on a local PBS station. They were rivals and competitors.
Thumbs up, thumbs down is such an arbitrary thing anyway.
Not arbitrary.
And over 3 decades, they never missed a chance to let the other one know he was wrong.
I'm really surprised at you. You should be ashamed of yourself.
What,
first of all,
for not agreeing with you? I've never been ashamed of that. I've been proud of that.
Their passion for film made them television stars and helped pave the way for a generation of movie lovers, including your hosts, Dylan Wilcox and Miranda Broder. I'm your co-host, Dylan Wilcox, a movie buff who went from selling popcorn at the local movie theater to working in Hollywood.
And I'm your co-host, Miranda Broder, an English and film teacher living in the Bay Area. We've experienced so many movies together throughout the years, and so many discoveries were thanks to Siskel and Ebert.
We'll be reviewing the movies and the reviewers, discussing if the films hold up and if their opinions hold up, as we hope to discover and rediscover some gems along the way.
This is Back at the Movies, and the balcony is open. Well, our first film from our 2-part series on the Brat Pack is called The Breakfast Club, and I'm pretty sure most of you have seen it, but it's a 1985 American teen film. It came out February 15th, 1985. It's a coming-of-age comedy drama. Written and produced by John Hughes again, and with our Brat Pack, core Brat Pack, Emilio Estevez, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, and I'm gonna let
Molly Ringwald.
And Molly Ringwald. She goes without announcing.
Although apparently Anthony Michael Hall wasn't in the Brat Pack, which is kind of like God. Even in the Brat Pack, he was too nerdy or something.
That's so sad. I didn't know that. There's a lot of controversy about who's in the Brat Pack and who isn't. There's like the main Brat Packy people, and then there's a lot of other actors who kind of like John Cryer and whatnot.
Well, the original article, by the way, and this was not talked about in the Bratz documentary that Andrew McCarthy directed. So according to the article, the Brat Pack was Tom Cruise, Rob Lowe, Judd Nelson, Timothy Hutton, Matt Dillon, Nicolas Cage, Sean Penn, and then not quite there are Matthew Broderick, Matthew Modine. So I think this is a very fluid list, to say the least. But that's who they claimed was part of the Brat Pack. Obviously leaving a lot of people out, including the ladies.
True, and like Leah Thompson. So why don't we, I think Ebert introduces the film, and by the way, we could not find the episode where they both reviewed it, so we just have Ebert on like a special edition episode.
Yeah, it seemed like Ebert was going solo on some sort of other program that I didn't know existed. Super bummer. If anyone knows where we can find the Siskel and Ebert talking together about the Breakfast Club, please let us know. But Ebert talks about it, and there's no way we could talk about the Brat Pack without talking about this movie. So let's hear him talk about it.
The Breakfast Club tells the story of 5 teenage troublemakers who have to spend all day Saturday in detention. They get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is why they're called the Breakfast Club. The movie stars 5 of the most talented and promising newcomers in Hollywood today. Judd Nelson plays the tough teenage rebel. Amelia Estevez from Repo Man plays the jock, the high school wrestler. Molly Ringwald from 16 Candles plays the social butterfly. Ali Sheedy from War Games is an erotic girl who doesn't talk to anyone. And Anthony Michael Hall, he was the nerd in 16 Candles. This time he plays the class brain. When the day starts out, these kids have nothing in common, but after a while they begin to open up, to talk, and to share their secrets with each other. They all agree on one thing: the teacher is the enemy. There's a lot of talk in this movie. It all takes place in one room, a giant library, where various combinations of the kids pair off and go up in the corner and talk and confess and break down and fight and finally get to a little bit of the truth about themselves. It's kind of serious. It's sort of heavy going, but it's interesting to see a teenage movie that takes its characters seriously. And I give Breakfast Club 3 stars.
I'm such a Roger Ebert nerd that I already knew that it was 3 stars because I remember his review of this from one of his movie home companion books that I owned. And that was like my nighttime reading.
We should tell our listeners what 3 stars out of what?
4 stars. Yep.
Yes. So it's not like 3 out of 5. It's 3 out of 4.
3 out of 4. Yep.
Not too
Anything
bad.
over 2.5 was a thumbs up. So
yeah. I have to like put a little plug in there for, because, you know, of course, I'm a teacher and a parent.
One of my questions was, I can't wait to hear what you think about this movie as a teacher. But go ahead.
It's a common trope throughout teen movies that always bothers me. Is that they have to make the parents the enemy, and they have to have somebody who's the enemy. So they have to have the parents as the enemy. In this case, it's parents and teachers, any adult. Which was not my experience as a child, because I actually liked my parents. I know you did too. And we're not just saying that because our parents are listening, by the way. But yeah, so I don't relate to that. And it always felt really false to me, like as if we were supposed to, like, it was pushing that agenda that we were supposed to like rebel against our parents always. Say Anything was one of the films where it actually didn't do that. And I really appreciated that, where the girl was actually liked her parent and confided in them and whatnot. But
she likes her dad in 16 Candles.
That's true. And in Pretty in Pink as well, like she has a relationship with her father that's not entirely adversarial or whatever. But that said, I was not offended by the portrayal of this teacher. I just took it as one asshole teacher, as opposed to like all teachers are assholes. And of course, the custodian was really cool.
Is Saturday detention a thing? Because I don't remember that in high school. Not that I ever had. I think I got sent to detention once. No, I got sent to the principal's office. But
what did you do, Dylan? I can't imagine you getting sent to the principal's office.
We were talking, and yeah, I was one of a group. I think he just lost it, and he like made 10 of us march down. So that was as bad as it got. Yeah, I was even when I break the rules, I'm a total follower. You know,
me too. Now this is
but
going
is Saturday detention a thing? Because I do think it's kind of weird that teachers would put themselves in the position where they'd have to be there every Saturday.
We actually had Saturday school at my high school. I remember that as being a thing. So it was actually a thing. Maybe it depended on the high school and how much like they needed to discipline the kids or something.
And we are really good kids. Because, you know, there might have been Saturday detention. One of our listeners, Astra, hey girl, texted in to say that she went to all these ragers all the time in high school where they would destroy their parents' houses.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So it really did happen. Okay.
Yeah, we're just really sheltered. Okay, Breakfast Club.
So aside from the whole detention frame of this movie, it is very relatable, at least for me. Like, I felt like it really does kind of speak to the cliques that happen in high school. And it is really geared towards high school students themselves. And I think we lose touch with that after we become adults, how that can still be a thing for kids. Because as an adult, as a teacher, I don't see the cliques as easily, because I kind of see the students more objectively. Like, you know, I look at them as like in my own categorization, you know, the sweet ones, the bad boys, the, you know, whatever. But that's my own thing. But you definitely know what the hierarchy is when you're in school yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that experience?
I did. I think this movie was so influential, not only on myself, but our generation. Definitely our class, because rewatching this now, it was almost like a PSA. Like, we were well equipped to understand what school is like. And my memory of high school is that we were so aware of what these cliques were. I felt like there was a lot of people who just tried to avoid it because we didn't want to live in that sort of high school. I don't know. But yeah, rewatching this, I'm like, oh God, I knew this before high school.
And I guess that's the major theme of this movie, is that it's these people from different social stratas, and they come together and they kind of have a therapy session, as they said in like the Bratz documentary. They have this therapy session and they kind of come to an understanding by the end that, you know, they're not as different as they thought they were, or that they all have aspects of each other's stereotype. So our producer pointed something out to us.
So I went and did some research just in case there was anything that we couldn't, if there was any chance of us finding this clip or the missing Breakfast Club interview. And the most 80s thing apparently happened, including, this is even referenced on SiskelandEbert.com, where there's a repository of almost every episode of Siskel and Ebert. The person who recorded this episode, their VHS tape ran out of tape before the end of the episode, and it got cut off. So the first 2 reviews are online from this episode, but the last review, which is The Breakfast Club, and a discussion on the colorization of films.
You know, screw the Trump tapes.
Yeah.
Screw Bigfoot. The lost Siskel and Ebert Breakfast Club review is out there somewhere.
Yep, it is.
Come on, our tens of listeners. Get to it.
So
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Dylan.
So I was very nervous watching this movie because it had been years and years. And this, much like 16 Candles, I not only know the movie by heart, but I know the TV edit by heart as well.
Yes.
And after the disappointment of 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink, I was very nervous about wading back into the Brat Pack.
Well, you mentioned the TV version. I always loved watching the TV version because it was hilarious to me to see how they would edit out like the swear words and what they would edit out and what they would miss. So I remember the big scene where Judd Nelson yells to the teacher, "Fuck you!" And then it reverberates and like echoes. And they got the "fuck you" and the initial "fuck you," but they forgot about the reverberation.
Hey,
it was all "you twerp."
That was so
fuck you.
Okay, so this is a movie's a touchstone, not only for me personally. It was the voice of a generation.
Yes.
How does it hold up?
I think that it really held up, personally.
Yay!
Yeah.
Me too. Don't worry, everyone who was annoyed that we didn't like 16 Candles after all these years, back on board for the Breakfast Club.
And people should know that Dylan and we watch these movies separately, and then we don't even talk to each other about the movie until we're doing the podcast. So we're kind of like...
Sometimes it shows.
Yeah, sometimes it shows. But also, we don't know what each other are going to think about the movie. So it's like a surprise to us, too, what we each think. No, I thought that it totally held up. Of course, there was some problematic...
I feel like we need to start a segment of our podcast, like the problematic portion. We'll just call it that, because so many of these movies.
Yes.
My big takeaway is, yes, there was problematic stuff, but not enough to derail the experience. I was actually much more engrossed than I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
I think the biggie is, of course, biting her under the table.
Right. And just like constantly, like basically just hounding her. And then at the end, her being super like attracted to the fact that he's been like this real bad boy, you know.
I want to talk about the end, but probably later.
I thought that it was worth noting. We were touching on this a little bit before, that in the documentary, Malcolm Gladwell talks about how a lot of times, you know, in these movies, that we kind of look at the characters and we may identify with them, but sometimes we identify with them in terms of what we wish that we would be. Which character would you relate to mostly in the Breakfast Club?
Okay, well, first I'll just say, upon reflection, Malcolm Gladwell and not Judd Nelson or Molly Ringwald in the documentary, kind of weird. But not to dwell on that, Brian, the nerd, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would have gone with the Ali Sheedy character, even though I wasn't like 100% on board with like self-mutilation and whatnot. But I think that we choose the characters that I think we identify with the
Wait,
the
was she
characters,
self-mutilating?
Well, yeah, when she puts the string around her finger and like pulls it like super tight and like.
Oh, I thought you meant like cutting.
Well, that's
you never did that.
That's a form of cutting, I think. It's like, don't you think?
No, I think that's boredom. I did that. It's fascinating to watch how your finger gets purple.
That is true. It's kind of like when you used to put like glue on your hand.
Yeah,
and then
I thought that was very relatable.
Yeah, no, it's relatable, but I think like it's one of the things about her personality that kind of checks out, because I think she would be that type of person who would probably in this day and age be cutting, you know.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think so. You know, that kind of anxiety-ridden, you know, needing a release kind of thing. Yeah, so he makes the point that we built our identities based on these characters. And they became our touchstones for like what these different like types were. And some of that is shaping who we were, and some of it is us. I mean, it's like, does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? In this case,
well, they're archetypes, and that is definitely reinforcing. It was so interesting. I actually watched a few minutes of Rebel Without a Cause, like the day before I watched this. Coincidentally, it was on TV. And this feels like Rebel Without a Cause for the 80s generation.
In what way?
The talk of masculinity, for sure. And that's something I really clocked watching Breakfast Club again, is the machismo and the toxic masculinity, and how that just really affected all the men and women in this little incubator of a society that we get to watch for a day. You're a wrestler, you wear tights, and of course the F word.
Yes.
Which did not bother me in this movie. Because it felt like it was character based.
Yes, character based. It was realistic. It's what kids would have said back in those days.
And Brian talking about how he's not a virgin, and sex, and that being such a crucible in this movie. And just thinking about the 80s too, about how this was coming on the heels of 16 Candles, which itself, as we talked about last week, was kind of a transformative time away from the Porky stuff. And Siskel and Ebert talked about that. And now we have Breakfast Club that is really challenging that.
Yeah.
While participating in it too. And rewatching it now and just kind of remembering what movies came before this, that really unnecessary scene under the table felt like a little, gotta give something for the Porkies. And this movie does dip into mainstream stuff, and we can tackle the ending. But I do think that's actually was smart of John Hughes to make some more, shall we say, magical realism moments of the dancing, and like they're all smoking pot. Like they would have got caught. But by that time, you just really just want to follow these characters. And
it was interesting how watching that, it seemed very, you did have to suspend a little disbelief that they would all be like dancing with each other and whatnot, but it seemed right also.
Totally seems right. Yeah.
I feel like this is a great example of showing, not telling. We see who these characters are, and in a very short time. This isn't
absolutely. That's what I thought so too.
Yeah, and it's not a long movie. They didn't have to go into too much detail, but you know who they are, not because they said it or because they dress a certain way or anything, but the acting is really great. And I do feel
really is
sad for like the actors in lieu of watching the documentary, because I mean these were really good actors, and they got kind of categorized as this Brat Pack, and that limited them a lot in what they could do in the future. And I think that they're actually very good actors. And Anthony Michael Hall, he in that scene you were talking about before about whether he's a virgin or not, that was all just show. His facial expressions, him pointing.
He is so good in this movie.
Yes, he's really, really good. And
I thought like towards the end of the movie, I had this realization. It's not a realization, but thinking that Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall were in 16 Candles, and they just feel like totally different characters. The way they relate, you're not thinking, I wasn't even thinking, oh, it's them in this movie.
Right.
It just really shows how well they work together. And I never really thought about how great these performances were until rewatching it this time.
Mm-hmm. So again, thinking about like the different types and how teenagers relate to those, to watching movies like this, the documentary kind of touches on this. Do you think there's any kind of touchstone today that kids have in the same way? I mean, I feel like these kind of movies, everyone knew about them. And in fact, to this day, I think people know. And it says something about you as what generation you fall into it, if you can like quote the
old people like us. I think there are different touchstones. I think a very big difference, though, is that we watch these movies on loop on VHS and DVD, and that's not something that the kids are doing now. So there's no quoting. It's you watch a season of TV. You know, you watch all of Euphoria, and you share about it in social media and talk about it. But are you really rewatching and ingesting quotes? That's not a thing anymore. Yeah,
and not everyone's doing it either. There's so much content out there, so much choice.
Yeah, and just to go back to why this movie was a touchstone at the time is this really did feel like you were seeing teenagers interact in a way that you never saw on screen before.
Yeah,
and it felt authentic. And I think that's why John Hughes was so important to our generation, is that it felt like it had that authenticity and also entertaining, you know?
Right.
It's a fun movie to watch. They're fun movies.
And they made the point in the Bratz documentary about how if you would ask 90 if you'd asked 100 kids back then something about Pretty in Pink or something about one of these movies, 90 out of 100 of them would be able to quote you things, would be able to tell you exactly what it's about. Even if they hadn't seen it, they would have been able to do that. And nowadays, I just don't think there's anything that kind of compares to that. Like, I don't think with teenagers that everybody has their own thing, and there's no like unifying thing that kind of bonds everyone together.
Yeah, there's no monoculture anymore. And I would say, especially in the past few years, especially after COVID, watching things is now seen as a solitary experience on your device.
Right.
So there's no... You know, we were growing up, it was like, we're putting Breakfast Club. I remember watching this with my parents. I think they wanted to see it because they were very curious what we were watching. And I remember them loving the Brian character. But
really,
that's kind of different, you know, if you don't have to watch the same thing as the other people in your household. And it's very easy to go on and there's an abundance of content, which has created the death of the monoculture.
But in some ways, it's a good thing because there's a lot of different characters now. A lot of different people are being represented and not as outsiders or geeks or, you know, weirdos and stuff, but as just like people. I'm seeing anyway, in a lot of like you mentioned Euphoria. Like, I think that it's like the geek and the outsider have become like the cool people now.
The Revenge of the Nerds played out.
It totally did.
Oh God, are we going to watch that movie?
Oh my goodness.
Talk about rape culture.
Remember what I said to you when we watched that movie together? The Anthony Edwards character says, jocks are always thinking about sports and nerds are always thinking about sex. So, you know, basically nerds are going to be better lovers than jocks. And I looked at you and I was like, that's really true, Dylan. You were like, that's so deep. Like, you were totally making fun of me. But it was...
I'm like, oh God, I wasn't sincere. Thank God. Oh, the another thing about showing not telling is all of their lunches.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of broad, but it's also, again, you get them very quickly.
Right. She has sushi.
I know. And of course now rewatching it, my whole thing is, oh my God, that sushi looks so good.
I know. Like, how that is awesome that her parents packed that for her little bento box.
And then Andrew pulls out all of his food, and later on you see how small Emilio is. I'm like, he doesn't eat all that food.
Right. The whole time I'm thinking, like, come on, share a little of that you've got a whole packet of cookies, a whole thing of chips. Are you really going to eat all that? No. But the Ali Sheedy's lunch is a pinnacle.
I know, we should have made
so
sugar
disgusting
Captain Crunch sandwiches for this pod. But yeah, the screenplay is totally economical and it sets up the stakes and it's just really well built and you just care immediately. And I knew every line, but for some reason, it still felt like a surprise. Of course, when the Simple Minds song started, I was automatically in.
Mm-hmm.
But I was really I was very surprised that I was still able to get wrapped up in it, and I teared up a little bit during the therapy scene.
Oh,
I think because I was thinking about how much this movie meant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how important that scene was to our generation.
Yeah, totally. I could pretty much like recite this movie from memory because I've seen it so many times, but I hadn't actually seen it for quite a few years. And I agree with you. It still holds up. It's very touching when they're, the dramatic parts are touching. And one of the people in the documentary, Susanna Gora, she was a writer who wrote You Couldn't Ignore Me If You Tried. She talks about how these movies were appealing to teens partly because they weren't just about romantic love. This movie does have to tack on the romantic love part of it at the end, but mostly it's about connections and friendships. And that's something really powerful, especially back then, because not without the internet, without having our smartphones and being able to look like immediately on our smartphones to find people who relate with us or like our content. Like we had these movies that would remind us.
To subscribe and like.
But we had these movies that were really important to like seeing the connections are more important even than the romance. I mean, do you care about the fact that they get together at the end? No,
but that felt like a commercial to make this movie more commercial. I'm sure the executives were like, what do you mean 5 people? So this is the movie Johnny Hughes wanted to make first. But the studio made him make 16 Candles first. And after that, then they said, you can make Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
But I think that they had to have that in there. The ending.
Yeah.
So.
And it does matter the sequence that these movies come out in terms of how we perceived them back in the day. Because I think we had all like just come off of the heels of 16 Candles and we were introduced to Molly Ringwald. And then this movie came and this was like the more serious, more like intense, emotionally intense type of movie. And of course, we're going to talk about St. Elmo's Fire, which came the following year. But, it really does kind of matter like how we saw this Brat Pack, what images we had in our mind and what they were dispelling and what they were keeping in each of the subsequent movies.
Yeah. I did want to talk a little bit about the ending.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes to visit him in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of, that is something that does feel dated because he is really sexually harassing her. But then I'm also like, that's kind of like you were saying, you get to be these other people. Like, oh my gosh, what happens if you hook up with the bad guy in school,
Right.
She gives him her earring.
Mm-hmm.
And when I watched this, because my friend and I taught a class in college, and we watched this, and our teacher, who had never seen Breakfast Club, watched it. And our film professor afterwards was like, oh, they totally had sex in the closet. And my mind was blown.
They did?
Rewatching it, I was like, no. And then she said, who gives someone their diamond earring just for a kiss?
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, she's totally right. And then him scoring on the field. That's the very last image.
Oh.
So I kind of like that reading. Especially after talking about if she's a virgin the whole time, and she decides that he's the one that she wants to lose her virginity to.
That makes
she knows he's experienced.
Yeah, I didn't see that back in the day, and I didn't see it when I watched it this time either. But I hear what you're saying, and I can totally understand how that could be the narrative, especially after watching St. Elmo's Fire. What happens at the end of that? Where basically the girl gets, deflowered, and that's like supposed to be this major thing, that she's undertaken. It seemed like it was a common trope at the time with teen movies that losing your virginity was really, really, really like the pinnacle.
And that was Porky's. Porky's, and that was also the masculinity thing of the 80s, which I think we're experiencing now in different ways.
It's hard to know, like, because I remember being really concerned about virginity as well. And I don't know if that came from movies I was watching that were so concerned with it. my parents, I didn't even talk with my mom about waiting until you love somebody kind of thing. But like virginity was a topic that I was thinking about a lot. For a lot of people, they just couldn't wait to lose it. A lot of girls, like, they felt like they were a loser if they hadn't had sex in high school. I was the opposite. I thought, like, I'd held on to this power. Like, I'm like resisting all this stuff. I'm like strong. And you probably experienced it in a totally different way as a guy.
Well, as a closeted guy, it really felt anthropological. Like we were talking about 16 Candles last week.
Yeah.
These kind of movies and all this talk of virginity, it just felt compartmentalized. And I thought that was something that was going to happen with me later.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to acknowledge my feelings, I think. The other part of the ending I want to talk about is her makeover. I remember seeing this at the UC Berkeley Theater, and it was a sold-out crowd of people who love this movie, and I was expecting people to cheer, and everyone booed, and that was a little coming-of-age moment for myself. I'm like, oh, this is bad.
How am I supposed to think about this?
Yeah,
oh, no.
Yeah.
Slap on the hand.
Okay, and here's my hot take. Rewatching it this past week, she does look better. Sorry, everybody.
You sexist, you get to go lying and
Okay, the bow and the clothes, absolutely not. But she has a pretty face. And her eyes look really pretty.
She does.
I guess I'm getting conservative in my old age.
All her problems were solved after that, really, pretty much.
So Miranda, do they hang out on Monday?
I think, gosh, good point. I want to think that they do, but I don't in reality think that they do.
I think the only people that hang out are, I think, Molly Ringwald. I think Claire brings Bender around, and when he says, wouldn't I be great in that capacity to use your parents against each other?
Yes.
So I'd like to think that this totally goes into this crazy
narrative,
toxic relationship.
Yeah.
And then I bet Brian and Allison, I'd like to think that they like run into each other in college or after college and hang out.
Right. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they all say hi to each other in the hall, like a little like acknowledging.
Yeah, probably just a nod.
I really don't think one day in detention is gonna be strong enough to withstand all the peer pressure that they're experiencing in high school about coolness and what group that they're in and whatnot. I want to say like one last thing about this movie. This is an example to me of how when you're young and when you don't know things, you don't see things. I only just now have seen that there's a point in the movie where Anthony Michael Hall looks over at the Claire character, and then you see him switching in his seat a little bit. It just dawned on me that he got an erection.
Oh.
I just learned that today. Or yesterday when I watched the movie.
See, a true classic is something you can revisit time and again, and notice something new.
And always get something out. I totally did not think that at all.
My rewatch this time, I'm like, okay, Bender's totally a sexual harasser and probably should be put in prison. But it really bothers me when he's tearing up the card catalog.
Oh, I know, me too.
That was a step too far. Yeah,
I thought was way too far. You don't do that to books.
Yeah, that's the real problematic part of this movie.
That was fucked up.
Okay, so I know some listeners were a little concerned after our John Hughes reactions last week. Back on board, Breakfast Club, totally worth a rewatch if you have seen it a bunch of times. Yep. I think this goes in our column of worth your time.
It is considered by not just, us laymen, but like by critics, to be an actual good movie. And I would agree with that. I think that it's
one of the classics of the 80s, for sure.
It totally is. And it still holds up. Thumbs up.
Yes. And our producer did a little bit of digging and was able to find, yes, Siskel and Ebert both gave this 2 thumbs up.
Yes.
So, sorry we didn't have more clips of them. But, oh boy, do we have clips for St. Elmo's Fire coming up next.
Yes.
All right, now we come to the brattiest movie of the Brat Pack, I would say, St. Elmo's Fire, directed by Joel Schumacher, who would do Lost Boys after this. And this really is a who's who of the Brat Pack. We've got Rob Lowe. We've got Demi Moore. We've got Emilio Estevez. Ali Sheedy, welcome back. Judd Nelson, welcome back. Mara Winningham. Andy McDowell. Was she in the Brat Pack? I never thought of that. Although, honestly, I didn't really think of the Brat Pack much. I was a kid.
Yeah.
And, of course, Andrew McCarthy, where the Brat Pack appeared to have haunted him.
Yeah.
And felt the need to go discover what the other Brat Packers had to say. And it was kind of fascinating. The ones who were kind of like, yeah, it was annoying, but we let it go.
And we were still able to make a career.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Rob Lowe, like at his Malibu house, being like, yeah. But also Rob Lowe.
Yeah.
He not only survived the Brat Pack, then he survived the 1989 Snow White Oscars and then a sex tape 2 weeks later. So I think...
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so Rob Lowe really gets...
And, now he's going to have to survive this... Now he's going to have to survive this documentary, too, in terms of the bald spot that I saw on the back of his head, which I was like, dude...
I know, but he drinks the potion. He looks fantastic.
He is... freaking hot, and I never thought he wasn't my type back in the day, but he's so good looking.
He is so hot in this movie, and I have met him, and he's really put together in person too. But yeah, he's really hot in this movie, and he looks like a Lost Boy. Thinking that Joel Schumacher, doesn't he look like he could have been one of the Lost Boys?
Probably, yeah, like vampirish.
So Andrew McCarthy might have some issues with how the Brat Pack was talked about, but man, oh man, hell hath no fury like Gene Siskel with this movie. Clip 1, let's start hearing him. He goes on, hey, we might not have had him for Breakfast Club, but boy, do we have him for St. Elmo's Fire. Here he is introducing the movie.
Yes.
St. Elmo's Fire, which is both the name of a bar in the trendy Georgetown section of Washington, D.C., as well as a scientific term for a flurry of energy that pops up out of nowhere. It's also the name of a very bad, falsely heroic movie. St. Elmo's Fire follows a group of college kids just a few months after their graduation, and it recounts some of their fun, but mostly their fears. One kid's too shy. One's not shy enough. One's too materialistic. One can't get a date. One's a cokehead. All of them drink. Sex and money and love occupy most of their thoughts. Now that, of course, makes these kids fairly normal, but this movie treats them as if they were the only creatures on Earth experiencing such traumas.
Sign me up. Sounds like a fun movie to me.
In concept, it could be, but yeah.
Yeah. He goes on to hate some more. Let's play this, and then they play a film clip, because they talk about it on the other side, and... man, he goes on.
Boy, I get really tired of seeing these people in this film, and very soon. Just too many pat speeches in the picture, including this one coming up next, where Ali Sheedy tells off Judd Nelson, who says he loves her, but he has been fooling around with other women every night of his life.
What are we going to do about your extracurricular love life? Huh?
What extracurricular love life?
Oh, come on.
What did Kevin tell you?
Nothing.
What did you tell her? What did you tell her?
He told me nothing. It was just a hunch. Until now.
Yeah, sure it was. Now, this is a Rat Pack group. They spent every night together. She isn't going to find out, like, months ago, years ago, that he was
they've
fooling
been
around.
living together. I mean, she would kind of wonder after a while.
Why are you gone tonight? Unbelievable.
So angry.
Yeah. I feel him. I feel him.
Well, I have my own admission. I have never seen this movie.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you loved it. Like, Dylan, you'd never seen it.
No, I thought I'd seen it on TV, and I think I've seen bits and pieces, but this was a new watch for me.
So fresh off the
St. Elmo's Fire.
2024 viewpoint.
I really wasn't on as cool as I thought because I totally missed this movie. I think this felt more adult. I think because they had graduated college, this was kind of beyond my pay grade when I was 10, whenever this movie came out.
Which is interesting.
Watching The Breakfast Club, but Sam and Elmo's Fire, too much.
Which is interesting because it was 1 year later after The Breakfast Club.
Yeah, it was later that, it was June. So this was a big summer movie.
Yeah, and like all of these people we totally bought them as high schoolers, but then suddenly now they're in their early 20s. And all the actors were pretty much in their early 20s except for Molly Ringwald, who actually was like 18.
And she was not in this movie.
17. But yeah. Hot off the heels of The Breakfast Club, I think we had high expectations for this movie. I do remember seeing it back in the day, and I do remember hating it back then. I did not like any of these characters. I thought they were total and complete shitheads. I hated them, and I still do.
Wow.
I still completely hate this movie.
Well, I think they're shitheads. I hate them. I did not hate this movie, Miranda.
What?
I enjoyed watching it.
What? Oh my God.
I thought it was actually a very interesting, it felt like such a 1985 movie, thinking about how the Judd Nelson character was a Democrat and now he's a Republican because he wants to chase the money.
Yes.
I mean, the Demi Moore stuff with this movie is problematic. Before I continue with my mild defense, Siskel, you thought he was done? He's not done. Before. Sorry.
Young people in this film infuriated me in dozens of ways. They act rowdy in bars as if it were their divine birthright. That's the opening scene of the film. That's when I really didn't like that. They think they're cooler than everyone else in the bar so they can act like jerks running around singing and dancing. They talk in clever phrases and not like regular people. And the filmmaking here in this picture is also second rate. Director Joel Schumacher, who has never made a film that I've respected in the least, he also made The Incredible Shrinking Woman with Lily Tomlin. That almost ended her film career. He seemingly wants to criticize these kids, but his soundtrack, it romanticizes them, makes them into heroes. His only black character in the film is a shameful parody of a hooker who should draw hoots from the NAACP. If I were black and I saw this film, I'd walk out, I'd hate it. And I'll tell you this, these kids hang out in a bar all the time. Well, I wouldn't want to step in that bar if the drinks were on the house every night of my life. The arrogance of this movie nauseated me.
Yeah.
Angry.
I agree with him.
I agree with him. I know, I agree with him. And I wrote down in my notes, I'm like, oh my God, the black prostitute. It's like, last week we were saying how there's no people of color, and then one pops up, and of course it's a prostitute. Man, that's a bad look.
Yeah.
And kudos, honestly, and this is just a reminder that this isn't some new thing that we're all, Siskel and Ebert were aware, and I really want to just give them props and him calling this out back in 1985. Not everyone had blinders on. People knew what was up. And this is a really glaring issue in this movie, and it's indefensible.
Right. I mean, they talk about this in the documentary Brats, this is mostly these teen movies, kind of John Hughes-esque teen movies, Brat Pack movies, are very white. But it's almost defensible in the other films because we're talking about these little suburban towns. Like that was, they make the point in the documentary that it's like, in a way, he's writing about what he knows and not trying to, but this movie totally just goes in the other direction. Schumacher just totally puts the stereotype, I'm going to put some people of color in there and then I'm going to make them a prostitute. Fuck you.
So bad. It's so bad.
And by the way, he never went on to make any other good movies except for The Lost Boys. I did like that movie, but
I was about to. We were about to get into it. Okay.
What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say The Lost Boys. Great movie.
Yeah, but that's the only movie I can see that he has done that was well done.
Well, I think that there's interesting. It almost felt like a movie that, like, what do adults do? But yeah, the stuff with the Arabs and all the cocaine. It felt very, almost, it did feel like 80s reactionary of this is the scary world with the scary people of color. Maybe it's a bad movie. I thought it was really interesting and I really liked watching it. What do you want me to say?
Are you sure you're not a little bit biased because of Joel Schumacher himself? Because he had his claim to fame is that he's had sex with like 10,000 men.
Did
you read about that?
That and every other gay man that I know. Sorry, you're gonna have to do that. Don't impress me much, as Shania Twain would say. I thought you were gonna say he had sex with Rob Lowe. Then I'd be like, oh,
well,
okay.
Now we can talk.
Yeah.
No.
Not interesting at all.
For a gay man to make such an unprogressive piece of shit as St. Elmo's Fire, I am very disappointed in Joel Schumacher.
I know, but it felt like an 80s movie. And I do think that this is an interesting movie to watch as a snapshot of 1985. And I know we're being very, I know we're not really sure, like, what our ultimate goal is with a lot of these movies. But in this specific, does this movie have problems? Absolutely. Is it well made? Probably not.
Probably not.
Is it interesting to rewatch, especially having not rewatched it? And it's soapy and it's melodramatic and it's kind of dumb and it kind of made me feel like I was watching a precursor to Melrose Place, which I'm not going to be mad about. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to use this as a plug for education for a moment because this is an example of terrible writing as opposed to, our previous discussion about Breakfast Club, where they're showing, not telling. This is telling, not showing. For instance, the Andrew McCarthy character, he's supposed to be this brilliant mind, this he wants to be a writer, and his co-star saying how he's the best mind of the country, and there's no evidence that he's intelligent in even the slightest way. And in fact, when they try to even show a little bit of what he might be about, the title of his piece that he puts into the newspaper is Observations on Life, the Meaning of Life. I mean, how fucking cliche can you get? This is my high schoolers write better than this.
Joel Schumacher is a campy director, and this movie has a camp element to it. And I'm weak in the knees when it comes to camp. One guess what Ebert thought of this.
You know what this movie answered for me? What question it answered for me? What happens to the stars of horny teenager movies when they go to college? These are the same guys who were in Bachelor Party. They just learned a few new words and got some new clothes at Georgetown. They are obnoxious. They are uninteresting. They are shallow. They are
Keep it coming. Keep going, because I feel the same way.
And the other thing is the movie they should have had fewer characters and told us something about these people. This is a soap opera from beginning to end. I mean, every scene is a climax. Every night is either a crisis or a sex scene or a drunk scene or a drug scene or breaking into somebody's apartment or racing off into the snow after some girl at somebody's...
Sounds like a fun movie to me.
This is sounding a little bit like the Showgirls of...
No, it's not that. No, it's not that. It's not that. Look, do I disagree with you? No. Right. But I enjoyed watching it. One thing I will say is I agree these people are garbage, but I didn't feel like the movie was defending them. And maybe I just thought they were so garbage that I didn't feel like I was being asked to sympathize or empathize with them. I just really watched it as a quick little pre-Melrose soap opera where it's so ridiculous and so 80s. I just thought it was really they are really gross, and it's this question of, do you sell out? And even the people who aren't selling out are still kind of gross. There was that comment, the welfare woman, and she's like, just give me my check. So yes, on its merits, is this a bad movie? Probably, but I think it's worth rewatching, especially after watching the Bratz documentary and thinking about the Brat Pack and understanding after watching this movie that I had not seen before, how the article in conjunction with this movie would have provoked a black backlash, because I think watching this movie through the lens of, these actors are this annoying in real life, I can see how that would have upset Andrew McCarthy and other people in this movie.
No. I'm sorry, Dylan. This is not even the music could save this movie. It was shitty music.
No, there was some no. No. There were some good bangers in this movie.
I'm not saying it wasn't popular music that went on to be popular, including the love, instrumental crap and the main
very
song.
80s.
very 80s, but in a very dorky, and when I say dorky, I don't mean like geek, like
Rob Lowe with a saxophone. I mean, it's amazing. Come on.
But it's no OMD or Echo and the Bunnymen or Stray Cats or Thompson Twins or Patti Smith or any of those. Or Oingo Boingo.
Patti Smith, Miranda.
We can't all be Patti Smith. It's true. But I mean, John Hughes films had it going on when it came to like British pop and new wave. You know, it's this was there's nothing redeemable about this movie.
But it's fun to watch.
It's fun to watch if you can get angry at it because it's so...
Well, I wonder if there's anything else that Siskel and Ebert could get mad about. Oh, yes, there is. Our final clip.
You enjoy about the Korean diplomat who's some sort of bagman mobster. They're just thrown in out of the blue, Korean mobster. So you have nice treatment of minorities in these films. All the white kids, you know, they're great. They're heroic. They're only drug users and alcohol abusers, you know. But so you got a black hooker and you got a Korean mobster. Real nice picture.
Well, one of the things that I thought was funny about the film is that this cast, if you look at the names, you mentioned a lot of the names.
Good names.
These are the best. These are every young actor in this age group wanted to make this movie.
Right.
And here they are, and they've made it, and I think they can be happy. It's the worst movie that any of the people in this movie have ever made. And believe me, I think I've seen all of their films. So that's some consolation, guys. You've made a lot better movies than this one, and I know you can do it again.
This is to me
Korean mobster, black prostitute. When he said that, I was like, oh yeah, this is really bad.
Yeah, I mean, okay, first of all, this is a great plug for Write What You Know. John Hughes, of course, wrote mostly characters that were white, but of course that was the suburban sort of reality at the time. This movie tries to attempt to be a little more urban or whatever, but it totally gets it wrong. And I guess, like in Schumacher's defense, if he were writing films and doing, you know, directing it in this day and age, he probably would be making some probably kind of cool gay films, maybe. But of course, he was limited back then. He had to make one of the characters in this quasi-gay, and then turns out, yay, he's not gay. It turns out he actually lives in love with... Weren't you offended by that? Like, weren't you offended by that characterization that they thought he was gay just because he didn't have a girlfriend?
Gay became very chic in the 1970s. Like, oh, see, they are.
Like, that sounds like a Schumacher. We're straight out of Schumacher.
Of course, yeah, of course. When it comes to gays, they get like representation. Did that bother me? Yeah, sure. The prostitute, of course, it bothered me, but I guess it was so campy. So many of these movies that we've been watching are boring. And I found that this was kind of silly. And no, did it succeed in what it was trying to do? No. But I think if you think about this movie and also Back to the Future and I'm not saying that they're of the same level. Of course, they're not. Back to the Future is one of the greatest. But this very mid-'80s, mid-Reagan, they talk about Reagan and Back to the Future and this masculinity crisis. And we talked about it in The Breakfast Club. And it just feels like such a quintessential 1985 movie that I think it's worthy on those merits. I don't know.
I hear you that it's like so over the top bad, and it is on a lot of critics' worst movie of all time kind of list.
And Rob Lowe did win the Razzie for worst supporting actor.
He did, which is not a good thing. But yeah. So maybe you've just given up like giving it any kind of artistic credence, so it then falls into the camp department.
So maybe it is. Maybe you've helped me articulate.
I mean, to me, like this film is not enjoyable to watch, even in a camp way, because the characters are so mean and horrible. They're so shallow and they're just so... Like, I would not want to be friends with these. I know that the people who are making this movie want you to think, like, this is a cool, connected, college group that's still, they're kind of finding their way. They start off the film going to the bar, and then they evolve.
No, they're all gross.
But it's like, they're all fucking assholes that I would never want to know, ever. And
I don't want to know Amanda from Melrose Place. Or Kimberly.
Well, that's true.
But then I wouldn't give Melrose Place thumbs up. I don't know. Miranda, you're confusing me.
Sorry.
We've got, you know what? We've got to take stands sometimes. And I think this is worthy of rewatching.
Yeah.
I think it's a fun time, even though they're all garbage.
Mm-hmm. It definitely marks a time and a place. And so I think from that standpoint, I would agree with you that I don't know if it's requisite viewing because like I can't, I don't
know. No, this is not requisite viewing. Let's not go crazy.
No, I'm thinking like of, a time and a place. Like this is kind of like, not in the American Psycho kind of way where it actually does paint a picture of a time and place. It may be a flawed movie, but there's a lot to recommend about it. I don't think it falls into that category just because the writing is just so bad. And not only are the characters just unlikable and hard to watch, but I even found it boring. And that's, to me, the worst thing a movie can be is boring.
Well, I didn't find it boring, and I was surprised because
I will excuse a lot of movies for, like, shitty stuff, but if you bore me, then you're done.
I thought it was silly enough that it wasn't boring. Look, yeah.
What did Travis think?
It's not a good movie.
I want a tiebreaker
here. This is
you
and me. No. If you want a tiebreaker, Travis, what do you think?
I really went into this movie thinking I was going to hate it because I had a fondness for it. And I remembered what I liked about it. It was like a cautionary tale of everything you don't do after college, even though you have all these hopes and dreams. And in that regard, I really enjoyed it. I mean, yeah, I hated it. And I'll admit it. You know what? I was with Brandon McCruck to be gay, and I still think he might be gay. Because every gay guy has said, "Oh, I'm in love with my best friend."
That's
at one point or another. So you know what? Thumbs up.
Miranda, you asked for a tiebreaker.
Oh, well, you know what? He made a good point, though, about the closeted gay trope that's in here.
Leave it to Joel Schumacher to find the nuance for the one character.
Because it doesn't seem like he's that disappointed when he doesn't get her in the end. He's kind of like, oh, well, I wasn't totally in love.
These people aren't acting like real people anyway.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. And I will actually say
Demi Moore sitting at the end in her apartment with the blue gauzy curtains and her like rocking. Amazing.
And okay, so shout out to Andie MacDowell. In every film, she's gorgeous. And in this film, no exception. Beautiful woman, love her clothes. Weird plot line where he just runs after her in the snow. So Andie MacDowell, I would say she's the highlight of this movie for me, just because she's so beautiful. And I don't know how she gets those perfect ringlets in her hair.
And Emilio is full stalker in this movie. This is like precursor to Fatal Attraction.
Totally.
She kisses him. It's so ridiculous.
And he goes to her house in the middle of the night.
This movie's ridiculous. Watch it.
He goes to the house in the middle of the night in the snowstorm, and she's like, "Oh, I'll spend the night." And her boyfriend is totally cool with it. In fact, at the end, he's like, "Let's take a picture of us all." What?
Yeah, this isn't how people act, but I feel like it's how people felt that they should act in 1985 if they wanted to be garbage. Well, shocker. Everyone on this podcast, except for me and my husband, producer Travis, hated this movie. This is a bad movie. Thumbs up. My podcast, my rules.
And I would say it's a thumbs down. I don't think it's worth it even for the camp value. I mean, okay, here's the difference between you and me. You're watching this movie with another person. So you're able to like make fun of it a little bit and get some enjoyment out of it in that way. I'm watching it like this lonely, like pathetic person all by themselves watching St. Elmo's like movies from the 1980s.
You're watching it in an empty room like Demi Moore at the end of St. Elmo's Fire.
Exactly. I was rocking back and forth and thinking, why am I doing this? What have I made of myself? Like, why am I on summer vacation? I need to be doing something right now because it's like that.
Oh, please. You'd be watching a show which with probably the same level of writing as this movie and saying it's the best thing ever.
You're right. Actually, you make a good point.
Let's end there with my good point. Thanks for listening to Back at the Movies. I'm your host, Dylan Wilcox.
And I'm your host, Miranda Broder. You can find us on social and Letterboxd at BATMPOD. That stands for Back at the Movies Pod. We'd like to thank our producer, Travis Bone, and Jay Edwards for the original music.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please give us 2 thumbs up by rating us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. That's our show, and until next time, the balcony is still closed.